All right, we'll get started here. My name is Mark Williamson. I'm one of the core coordinators for Transcend. I'll run the slides here going over our fall 2026 request for applications, and I'll have any of my fellow core coordinators chime in if appropriate. We'll have some time at the end, of course, for specific questions. So that I will get started. So a bit about the Transcend, if you're not familiar with Transcend. Transcend stands for Translational Science Engaging North Dakota. It is what's called a Clinical and Translational Research Development, or CTRD program. And our goal is to bring together researchers and clinicians across North Dakota to develop unique and innovative means of combating diseases and other health issues in the state. So we're supported by the National Institute of General Medical Sciences. So that's under the National Institutes of Health. And you don't need to memorize our award number unless, of course, you get funding from us and then are trying to publish. But other than that, um, you can just know that we are funded by the NIH. So we have two grant mechanisms. We have a pilot project and a developmental. So think of NIH is obviously big governmental institution that funds biomedical research. We're funded by NIH, so we're like almost like a mini grant organization ourselves that we get money to, develop things, and then we submit grant applications for people to apply to us to help get them started in clinical and translational research. So pilot project and developmental is how we fund projects. So you can imagine you as maybe a gator, a little fish swimming around, or maybe you're already a established researcher, but you're interested in clinical and translational research. And then the NIH is this big sea of funding, but also of danger, and it's a little bit overwhelming. Transcend is sort of like a pond where it's a little bit more, it's smaller, you get more support, you less competition, so that hopefully you kind of get your feet under you, or I guess your fins under you in this analogy of how to put together and complete a successful clinical and translational grant. And then obviously for the people we get funded, our ultimate goal, our ultimate hope is to help fund you, get your project going, so that eventually will be ready for the big pond or the ocean of NIH, as it were. So hopefully that conceptually frames what Transcend is for. So our first grant opportunity is a pilot project. And so it's intended to provide support to allow researchers to review novel hypothesis, just like a pilot grant if you've seen in other awards. We can support about 4 to 5 new awards with 75,000 total costs. That's both direct and indirect. And this is a 1-year project, so pretty small scale project. And we hope to have that started by July 1st of next year. And applications, because this is clinical and translational research, they should focus on that. And preclinical studies really would only be considered if there's a very clear path to progression to clinical research. And even then, that's a little bit iffy. It really should be clinical and translational research. Now, the developmental project is a little different. It is intended for projects with existing significant preliminary data to support a novel hypothesis. However, the scope must be unique from pilot projects. So in our second year, we didn't have anyone finish through our pilot project. So we just, for our initial developmental grants, it was projects that had already sort of gotten funding from other sources to do a smaller study, and they were trying to sort of expand. So those projects need to have sort of a unique differentiation. So they needed a new IRB, they needed a new clinical trials number if they had one. As some of our pilot projects finish up, um, there's anticipated for the pathway for those successful projects to also apply to developmental projects to expand their scope. So yeah, the two general pools of applicants for developmental are the people who have successfully come through the pilot project and ready for something bigger, or for people who haven't gone through the pilot project but have sort of funding already and preliminary data already, and so they can maybe jump right into a developmental. And yeah, so they're targeted towards current and prior pilot grant awardees or individuals have significant pilot data. Now, these are larger, so we can only do 1 to 2 of them, and they're 10,000, or sorry, 100,000 total cost, direct and indirect per year. And this is for 2 years, so 200,000 total. And then they will start at the same time, July 1st, but they'll run for 2 years rather than a single year. And applications should be focused on more like the T2 to T4, with T1 being considered if there's a clear path to progression to T2 to T4. So, who is eligible for these types of grants? So, you need to be a faculty or clinician at a participating Transcend institution who have applied to our Transcend portal network. That's typically going to be faculty from UND, NDSU, from Sanford Health, Sanford Research. And actually applying to the portal network, that's pretty straightforward. You just sign up and then you get it, as long as you have a sort of recognized email, institutional email, that's pretty straightforward. You need to not be a PI on other NIH IDEA funding. So if you're already funded through an NIH IDEA award, you're not eligible for a Transcend award. And if you're already a pilot project awardee for Transcend, you can't apply for a second pilot project. That would be something where you might look into a developmental, but you can't just do a couple pilot projects. And during your application, you're going to need to meet with all the cores. And the cores here are here to help you develop your project. And to be eligible, you need to spend your funding within North Dakota unless it's a special service cost. Like, for example, you maybe need to do some sort of diagnostic or sequencing that you can't do in North Dakota. You need to send it out. That would be an exception, but typically it has to be in North Dakota, use North Dakota patients, things like that. Yeah, and patient data must be from North Dakota. And proposals that don't have individual patients or persons, so if it's a totally laboratory-based investigation or doesn't have identifiable patient samples, that's not going to be eligible. So this needs to be human research, and not just de-identified human research. And as in the chat, as Savannah mentioned, was the for faculty eligibility, you must also be a paid employee of an institution to be PI. All right, so what does the schedule look like? So the due dates, so these are the big due dates, basic ones. So the letter of intent, we've now sent that out. And the letter of intent, that's going to be about 1 page, is due June 19th. So a fairly short turnaround, but then again, the letter of intent is fairly short to put together. For teams that are selected, so their letter of intent is approved, selected preliminary applications will be due August 21st. And then a revised application will be due November 20th for those who make it through review and are selected to move forward. And then final submission to the NIH will be January 15th, 2027, with an anticipated start date of July 1st. Extending out some of the due dates with some of the details of like what's actually happening. So letter of intent due June 19th. And then we'll look through those, make sure of those who actually are eligible and sort of meet the criteria, that can move forward. We'll let people know the week of June 22nd, 2026, that you're moving forward. And then at that point, you can reach out to have a team meeting with our cores. The various cores, we all work together to meet with the accepted projects all at once. So you have to one big core meeting within that time frame, or at least scheduled by July 17th. So then preliminary applications are due August 21st, and then we'll notify those who are selected to move forward on October 19th for revisions to route it through your institution's protocols. For example, UND will have to be routed through Novolution, etc. And then we'll send out applications for our external advisory committee for review, for comments, feedback, but January 4th, and then have all that rolled up for a final submission to the National Institutes of Health, January 15th. And then we'd anticipate award announcements like that. Yep, NIH has accepted them. We make sure all the feedback's taken care of, all the revisions, to be announced June 30th, and then start date of July 1st. Now, that doesn't mean that like, oh, you won't know if you're awarded at all until the 30th. That's just sort of the final confirmation that NIH has accepted everything. If you get to the point where we're submitting your final application to the NIH, that means that we've accepted you, that we went through our review process and awarded, and as long as the projects work with the feedback and comments on the NIH, I don't think we've ever had a project that is not accepted from there. And then, award date July 1st. So what are these projects going to look like? What should they be focused on? So our community engagement and outreach core has worked to put together priority research areas. So these have priority if your project covers those. I mean, there's more very specific categories like youth and young adults, closed head injury, but there's also fairly broad categories like in the general population, cancer is prevalent in North Dakota. No matter what your research area is, it's going to be incumbent on you as the applicant to demonstrate the importance of your problem to North Dakota and North Dakotans. So it doesn't have to be in the priority research area, but those, of course, take priority. But if you should be making the case why it matters for North Dakota, a North Dakota CTR. And so how these are evaluated, so both the pilot and developmental, they're going to be evaluated for relevance to the research priorities and TRANSCEND mission, the strength of the investigated personnel and any collaborators, and strength of the significance, innovation, approach, and environment, just like a normal grant. The pilot specifically is going to be evaluated also by the potential for the research personnel to coalesce around a relevant topic. That is, is your idea, is your team, like, is it coherent? Is it going to actually have looks like it's going to have a successful pilot project? And developmental is a little bit more developed because these research areas, these research projects should be further along. So they're going to be evaluated by the potential for a path to extramural grant submission. Like, if you get through the developmental award, is your project going to be ready for like an NIH R01 or R21 submission, something like that? Some conditions for funded. So if you get funded through Transcend, again, you're going to need to have a single PI with no concurrent funding from other IDEA programs. So you can't have another IDEA project funded. You should have clearly established milestones, including biannual progress reports and a project completion survey. And you're going to need to allow for budget and term adjustments as needed to comply with new requirements that arise. Of course, we're funded by NIH. We're kind of constrained by what they ask of us. And so we might have to change things that are sort of outside of our control for funded projects. Then another condition of funding is at least 2 oral presentations at our annual Transcend Symposium. The first year we had it in UND. Last year or this year's one we had at NDSU. And it's anticipated that you would have one introductory one as when you're first awarded, and then a year later, an update of like what you've done so far. And then any publications arising from Transcend support must cite our grant. So here's that grant number again that will need to go into any publications. All right, so that is some of the background. What will you actually be submitting? Well, the first thing you're going to be submitting, doing a couple weeks here, is our letter of intent. So format is going to be a one-page only, single space. So this is fairly minimal space-wise. Of course, the content, will need to be crafted carefully. And it's going to need to be 11 point or greater font, 1/2 hidden margins, all that sort of general formatting stuff. But what to actually include? Well, you're going to need to tell us about, the nature of your research, the focus of your research, what you're actually going to be doing. Make sure you're making the case that this is relevant to North Dakota populations. Otherwise, it doesn't fit the mission of Transcend. You need to explain how your research qualifies as clinical and translational research. Otherwise, it doesn't fit our RFA. You should describe your team members, their roles in the research, and then, if applicable, how it fits our research priorities. And if it's developmental, you should show that you have preliminary data that you're coming in with this project. And you'll be submitting this as a PDF to the Health Research Core Coordinator, Savannah. And she's on the call here too as well. And here's her email, and then you can go on the Transcend web page and get any of our emails. And so these will be submitted. I already mentioned this, but notification will go out the week of June 22nd, 2026, for those who we've accepted the letter of intent, so you can work towards submitting that full application. So the actual, what we call preliminary application, is going to be where you'll do the most work. For the pilot, this is on the right side. This is kind of what all needs to go in here, and this is replicated from the RFA language. And I tried to sort of distill it out because there's a lot going on here, and there's a lot of this jargon that NIH uses. And so I've tried to kind of parse out the important pieces. So the major pieces are going to be your specific aims. So that's going to be one page. Then your research strategy, which is going to be the bulk of like what your research actually is. And that's going to be 3 pages maximum. So the pilot, they're fairly short research strategy. Then, of course, another major piece is going to be your bibliography and reference and cited for your research, and then your budget, and that's under page 4. And then you're also going to need a detailed budget justification. And I think those are going to probably take the most of your time of crafting a solid proposal. Now, other pieces and forms that you'll need biographical sketches in the new common form from NIH. You'll need common form, current and pending other support, letters of support, specifically from either your department head or clinical unit chief, to confirm that you have time for the project. So essentially your boss, and then collaboration. If you have collaborators, you need to, whether they're consortium participants, senior or key personnel, or other contributors, you need letters of support from them. So essentially your boss needs to say it's okay for you to do this, and your collaborators need to say, yeah, we're actually going to work on it with you as the PI. Then you're going to need to do form pages 1 and 2, the face page, and then summary, relevance, project performance sites, and then the PHS 398 checklist. And then there are some conditional documents depending on your projects. Not all projects will need this. Like, for example, other support documents, or if you're using vertebrate animals, or if you're doing consortium or contractual agreements, etc. It really depends on specific projects. But everyone will need the major pieces, everyone will need the other pieces and forms, and then some will need the conditional documents. And so again, Specific aims and the research strategy are going to be the actual science of it that you'll need to craft. Now, the developmental is very similar, though there are a couple major differences. So first of all, the research strategy length is different. So for the pilot, we just saw it was 3 pages. The developmental is longer. It's twice as long as 6 pages. So specific aims is still 1 page. The research strategy is now 6 pages. So half page for significance, half page for innovation, more or less, and then about 5 pages for your approach. The other major difference is the budget details. Because this is a multi-year project, you're going to need a form page 4 and 5 rather than just a page 4. So page 5 is the budget for the entire proposed project period, and the page 4 is for the detailed budget for the initial budget period. All right, so some other requirements. So if you have a study and it requires an IRB, IBC, or IACUC approval, your approval will need to be secured before submitting your final applications to the NIH and includes letters verifying approval. So when you're applying for the initial application, you don't need to have these finalized, especially if they take, sometimes these can take a lot of work. So we do suggest that you at least draft it or sort of get it lined up. But we understand that, if you're, unless you have a good chance of being funded, it doesn't make a lot of sense to spend all this time trying to get these approvals if there's any funding behind it. Now, all proposals recommended by the TRANSCEND review panels will require approval by NIH prior to initiation. Now, again, I don't think we've ever had an instance where we've recommended a project and that the NIH had come back and said no. The NIH will sometimes come back and say, yeah, you need some revisions, but as long as you work on the revisions, you should be good to go. There are some specific studies for human subjects, which is going to be a lot of these. You're going to need written protocols, IRB approval, special training, in stuff with inclusion data records. And we can go through a lot of these more details as you meet with the cores. Specifically for clinical trials, you're going to have a plan for data and safety monitoring. You need a specific good clinical practice courses through the city program. And then if you deal with vertebrate animals, now again, these studies can't just be vertebrate animals, but conceivably there could be a project that uses both vertebrate animals and human subjects. In that case, you would need to have animal care and use education courses through the city program, and of course, probably certainly an IACUC approval. All right, so support. A lot of what TRANSCEND does is, again, we're like that pond. We're kind of a very smaller supportive area to really help get you to figure out how to submit a clinical and translational research grant. And so we have our health research core with Savannah. We have the research design compliance and data management core, which is the mouthful. So sometimes we call it the R2D2 core. There's Miranda and Mitchell from Sanford. There's Kent and myself from UND. We have our professional development core with Jamie, community engagement and outreach core, Brian, and then the administrative core, Nikki. And we all are here to help you put together the best grant you can. So we, as the core coordinators, we don't decide which grants which applications get funded. We're here to just support you. We send out your completed application to external reviewers and they review it, and we collate the reviews and take the top projects. So don't feel like you can't reach out to us because you think, oh, well, they're going to be judging us or something like that. We're here solely to support you. And just to get a feel for like what we've actually funded in the past. So our year ones are well underway. This was the first year, so we all just had pilot. We had anything from AI-powered risk prediction to radon testing to pharmacogenomics, more sort of traditional laboratory translational things with colorectal cancer, of the molecular profiling of CD8 T cells. And so a pretty big spread of different types of projects. Year two, which are just sort of trying to get finalized through the NIH, but we hope to have these all funded. We have things from Native American elders using photo voice and artwork, a community-informed menu. Again, this is for Native Americans in a substance use disorder setting. I think what is it? One of the nicknames of the study was like Meals that Heal, so looking at nutrition as health. We have a sleep optimization program. We have looking at environmental, especially agricultural environmental effects in North Dakota farmers. Looking at remote blood pressure monitoring for pregnant women. And we have two developmental. One's essentially a continuation. We couldn't get them funded the first year with a certain subset of special awards, so we're doing this developmental, dealing with anorexia, and the second one is a clinical trial on bariatric surgery. So again, a fairly widespread here. So kind of semi-final thing here, I have some FAQs I'll go over, and then we'll have time for discussion questions, etc. So who reviews the letter of intents and applications? It's a reasonable question. So the Health Research Corps will review the letters of intent, specifically kind of look through eligibility to make sure the project, the principal investigator is even eligible, the type of research is even eligible for this. And as long as those fairly straightforward requirements are met, probably some other sort of related requirements that we've already talked about with eligibility, those will go through. Now, for full applications, we actually send those to external reviewers. They review it in much the same way as, say, NIH would or other grant opportunities, and we get that back. Another question, how can I get connected to a collaborator? That might be one of the biggest hurdles. Say you're a faculty member, a laboratory-based researcher, but you need to deal with human subjects. Maybe you need a clinician collaborator, or maybe it's vice versa. Maybe you're a clinician, want to do some research, but you need some help sort of in the lab-based. We have our Pathfinder portal that you can sign up for. You can actually search names and expertise, etc. Or you can directly connect with myself or other core coordinators, and we can work with you to help find a collaborator if possible. Do I need to have an IRB approved before submitting? Kind of as I mentioned before, you don't have to have them approve, but we do ask that you have them drafted. So if you do move forward, you can get that finished in a timely manner so it's not being tripped up before final submission to the NIH. And then how can I tell if my project is considered clinical and translational research? A good rule of thumb is it's going to need to involve identifiable humans, and it will likely require IRB approval. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to be doing like a classically conceived of clinical trial where you're separating out patients and giving them a drug or sham or things like that. It might even be survey based, but it will need to involve identifiable humans. Some examples, you might collect tumor samples from patients or a behavioral survey or even, a bona fide clinical trial. And if you're really unsure, you certainly reach out to us, connect with the core coordinators, and we can work on that. Jamie very helpfully mentioned in the chat that you can email her directly. She's the navigator, and one of her big missions in Transcend is to connect you with collaborators or make introductions with other cores. So she's a great resource for that. So with that, that is the end of my little spiel here. Now is a great time for questions. Okay, so first of all, I'm just seeing in the chat, there's a question. So let's see, can you review what should be included in the letter that is due on 6/19? Okay, see if I can go to letter of intent. So it's going to be one page, single spaced, 11 point, half-inch margins. So it's going to have what your research is, why is it relevant to North Dakota, why is it clinical and translational, what are you and your team members going to be doing, what's your role, how does it fit our research priorities if applicable, and then if it's developmental preliminary data. And then second question under the chat this is from Kylie Hall. Can you submit letters for both a pilot and a developmental if they're different project areas? Theoretically, yes. Again, you'd have to make the case. But if they are totally different project areas, you could do more than one. Though I might suggest maybe chatting with us and if one is stronger than the other, maybe focus on the stronger one. And then third one, will the recording of this call be shared? I believe so. Am I right in saying, Savannah, that you're recording this?
Yes. So I think we
Okay.
can post this to the Transcend website once it's downloaded.
Yep. Yep. So this will be available. Okay. Let's see. Suggestion of pilot that leverages existing clinical research infrastructure and add research activities. I mean, that would be interesting. I guess we don't have a specific mechanism for that right now. Let's see, LI. Let's see. Okay, another question here. Uh, for a pilot project, is a formal clinical collaborator required at the LI stage, or can they help the navigator help identify them? So no, you don't have to have a clinical collaborator like locked in. Obviously, the sooner you reach out, the sooner you work with us, the more likely we are to be able to find it within the time frame. But you don't have to have that finalized. And we recognize that that's often one of the biggest struggles. And so we really try to help you with that if at all possible.
I'll just throw a caveat in there off of
Yeah.
what Mark said. If you know that you're going to need a collaborator for any study activities, the sooner you reach out, the better.
Hmm. Yeah. And we really work hard. We have great connections with Sanford, or we have core coordinators that are at Sanford. We can't we can't promise that we'll find a collaborator who fits the project who's interested, but we'll do our best to find one. Okay. Um, okay, on June 22nd, do you only accept 4 to 5 projects? Do you accept more and only submit 4 to 5? So yeah, we the 4 to 5 that we would select, we would move on to NIH. So we don't submit more to NIH than we can fund. So if essentially you're accepted by us, we do our external reviewers, we come back, we take the top 4 or 5. Those, unless some strange circumstances, those would be the ones that we'd submit to NIH and would hopefully be funded from there. Another question here, LOI to be formatted like specific aims or just a letter explaining the idea. I guess either way, I mean, we do have a wide range of letters of intent. I tried to put up here of like what to include. And does any of the core coordinators have any specific feedback if it would be better to do a specific aims page, like a specific aims page, or just more a broad letter explaining what the project is?
I personally feel like so long as the points here are covered effectively in that one page limit, there's not really a desired format. You really just want whatever's going to work best for you to accurately and sufficiently explain your research.
Mhm. Okay. I'm going to take a quick break from the chat and go to, looks like Melanie has her hand up. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I was just wondering, like, who I can brainstorm with. I have collected some data and was a previous like pilot on the Dakota, but my
Hmm.
research halted, and so I want to get it going again. And so I want to brainstorm with someone on framing that for this. And so who would I talk to on about that?
Yeah, so I guess the default would be any of the core coordinators. Jamie would be um, the best connection because she's the navigator, so helps connect all who of you might want to talk to. So I think
Okay.
she's in the chat. She has her email in the chat, or if you go right on to the Transcend webpage, you should be able to look through and find us. But that'd probably be the best, and that'd be a great thing to do is reach out to her. She can loop in other people who might help with that. We can have a brainstorming meeting and figure that out.
Okay, that sounds good. I got her information here. Thank you.
Okay. All right. I'll switch back to the chat. So, got a question about developmental grant. Is it limited to T2 to T4 research, or clinical mouse models or patient-derived organized studies also eligible if they have clear translational proposal? So I don't think the mouse models work at all. Um, Potentially patient-derived organized studies, but they would again really have to have clear translational potential towards T2 to T4. And they'd have to be a different project than simply the an extension of the pilot project. Kind of you need the next step up. Another question here in the chat. Our clinical collaborator is located outside of North Dakota, so it involved patients from another state. Would it be eligible for pilot or developmental? The long-term goal is to validate the technology and deploy in North Dakota healthcare settings where patients would ultimately benefit. As far as I understand, that unfortunately would not be eligible. Um, I don't know if any of the core coordinators would say otherwise.
No, that's my understanding as well. It has to
Okay.
involve North Dakotan patients population, and all of the funding really is intended to be spent within North Dakota.
Correct. And I think this information from or data from other states could definitely be used as sort of preliminary data in that sense, either for pilot or developmental. But yes, for Transcend's purposes, it has to be within the state of North Dakota.
Okay, another question here. What are challenges? You mentioned that the pilot projects were delayed. I think what that trying to decipher that. Well, essentially, you know, through Transcend, obviously, we're kind of in between. We're funded by the NIH, so ultimately, NIH will fund these, and so we have to work within our means to get the projects through, reviewed, and back to NIH, and ultimately, it's up to the NIH. So sometimes our timelines don't match up perfectly with NIH or what they can get back to us. So we just do our best to, I guess, meet our deadlines, given um, sort of the constraints on both the project and the NIH side. The second part of that question, I'm not sure what it means. Update how to mitigate requirements for PI to be paid employee if you're not.
I can answer this one.
Okay.
So with the requirement, NIH requires the PI to be, or rather, it's more UND is our parent institution for our grant that is coming from NIH. So UND itself requires the PIs to be paid employees of their institutions. So if you're coming from UND, you have to be a paid faculty member. Same with NDSU. You need to be a paid clinician at Sanford if you're the PI. So if you are a PI that, or if you are a faculty member, say that's retired or is volunteering at UND, you would need a you need to partner with a clinician perhaps to be the PI, and then you would be a co-investigator or another faculty member that is paid from the institution could be PI, and then again, you're a co-investigator. Leading into that, I see the next one is asking, are research assistant professors or research associates at UND eligible to serve as PI on Transcend applications, or is eligibility limited to tenure track and tenured faculty? I In the past, we've experienced some hiccups still with like research associates. I think so long as you are classified as a faculty member, you should be able to be PI. I don't know if any of the other coordinators want to chime in, but that's my understanding.
I'm guessing that research assistant professors would be easier to get through, or teaching anything like that that would be considered paid faculty. Research associates, I think, if they're not really considered faculty, if they're considered more like technicians, or if it's laboratory specific hires, might be harder to push through. We'd probably have to reach out for clarification at the administration core to determine that. And that would be something, if you did have questions, you could reach out specifically via email and send in like CVs, and we could go over them and see if there was any issues with being eligible.
I agree with Jamie.
All right. Looks like another chat question. Does R01 the only next step for funded projects? Or would the Transcend be able to help find the best fit for the project trajectory? Yeah, R01 is not the only next step, so we wouldn't anticipate that being the only one. There's other NIH type grants. There's obviously private grants. Our mission is sort of to develop, grow clinical translational research in North Dakota. Whether that does ultimately mean more of a R01 style grant project in the future, we'd hope that our sort of awardees would gain. There's certainly other options, other avenues. I know there's definitely been researchers I've worked with sort of on past grants that will look at different funding opportunities.
Mark, that's great, and make it clear that we'll help you do that. So if you go in for an R01, wonderful, but there's no reason you couldn't go for a less competitive, less remunerative award like an R21, or some agencies still exist that will offer an R03 for basically 75 or $100,000. So any R type or search type award is fine. Also, there's no reason why you could not submit as well to any disease-focused agency. So if you have a grant on cancer, you could submit to the American Cancer Foundation or the Prevent Cancer Foundation. If you have a project related to cardiovascular disease, there are a number of cardiovascular philanthropies, and there are state-based philanthropies that would encourage applications regardless of the disease or the exposure. So there's a wide range of things you could apply for, and the R01 is great, but is not the only one.
Mm-hmm. Another question here is question about overhead rates. Do we need to use the organization's overhead rate for NIH, or how has that worked for groups in the past? As far as I understand, you would use your institution's overhead rates. I don't know if there's clarifications or specifics from another coordinator?
Yes. So let's say you're at UND. I believe UND's indirect cost rate is 41%. So you would apply that to your direct costs to make up your total costs. It becomes a little more complex if you will be having a collaboration with other institutions. Say if you're at UND and you're collaborating with NDSU or Sanford, because then those institutions' indirect rates will likely apply to whatever money is going to them as well. We often collaborate with our grants office at the UND Medical School, and they can help to look over budgets to make sure that the costs are coming out correctly when considering those overhead rates. So that's certainly something that we would be able to help with.
Any other questions either in the chat or from attendees if you want to like use the raise your hand icon or something like that? Okay, I'm not seeing anything at this time. As we've mentioned before, a recording of this webinar will be on the Transcend webpage when we get it downloaded and edited. And certainly, if you have more questions or would like support on your letter of intent, certainly reach out to us. Jamie is going to be the great first contact. You don't have to wait until your letter of intent is submitted. You don't have to sort of wait for anything formal. You can just reach out right away and we can help you at whatever stage you're at. And of course, once your letter of intent is in, then we'll work with you as you reach out. And if your application is invited for a full submission, you'll meet with all the cores to see what range of help you have. There's a lot of help available for you to take advantage of to help you in any way we can to make the strongest applications. All right. Well, with that, I will close for today. Thanks everyone for joining, and good luck on letters of intent.